Jon Snow is standing at the top of the wall. It's the middle of the night, it's freezing, and he's just been told the single most important secret in the entire story, that he's not actually a bastard, that his real name is Aegon Targaryen, that he has a better claim to the Iron Throne than almost anyone alive. And what does he do with that information? He shrugs. He says he doesn't want it. He goes back to bed. That's basically Jon Snow's entire character in one scene. Somebody hands him the biggest piece of the puzzle in the whole story, and he treats it like homework he'd rather not do. And that's basically the scene that sums up this whole video. Because almost everyone who watches this show assumes Jon Snow is the main character. Not a main character. The main character. He's got the mystery parentage, the sword, the direwolf, the resurrection, the prophecy about ice zombies. He's the guy on half the posters. He's the guy the marketing wants you to think this whole thing is about. But here's the thing. If you actually go back through the show scene by scene and ask what Jon Snow does, not what happens to him, what he actually does, the picture completely flips. Jon Snow isn't the person moving the pieces on the board. He's one of the pieces. He is, without exaggeration, one of the least consequential major characters in the entire Game of Thrones. And I don't think that's a hot take, just for the sake of being a hot take. I think the show is quietly telling you this the entire time, and almost nobody clocks it because he's got main character lighting. Let's figure out why Jon Snow, the hero of Game of Thrones, might actually be the least important person in it. Before we get into Jon, we need a working definition, because important can't just mean on screen a lot. An important character is someone whose decisions bend the shape of the story, someone who, if you deleted them, the plot would have to be rewritten from scratch. Someone whose choices cause other people's lives to change. By that definition, look at Tyrion. He talks his way out of trial by combat. He burns the Blackwater fleet with wildfire. He kills his own father. Look at Daenerys. She builds an army from nothing across a continent, frees 3 cities, crosses an ocean. Look at Tywin, Littlefinger, Varys men, who spend the entire show quietly rearranging the board while everyone else reacts to them. Now, look at Jon, and ask yourself honestly, what does Jon Snow actually choose to do that reshapes the story, as opposed to things that simply happen around him while he reacts? Jon spends the first several seasons of the show at the wall, and if you strip away the sword fights, what you're left with is a young man who is almost entirely defined by what other people decide for him. He does choose to go to the Night's Watch, and on its own, that looks like an exception to everything I'm arguing. But look at why he chooses it. It's not a strategic decision, it's an escape. He joins because he can't stand being a bastard in his father's house, watching Robb inherit everything that will never be his. It's a retreat from a problem he can't solve at Winterfell, not a step toward anything he's building. And once he's actually there, the reacting starts almost immediately. He doesn't choose to become Lord Commander in any meaningful strategic sense. The Night's Watch votes for him, largely because Sam campaigns on his behalf, and because Alliser Thorne's faction is unpopular. He doesn't choose to die. He's murdered by his own men in a mutiny he barely sees coming, despite Sam and others basically warning him it was building. He doesn't even choose to come back to life. Melisandre does that, and it's specifically because Davos begs her to try, not because of anything Jon does in that moment. He's a corpse on a table for that entire decision. Even his most celebrated arc, bringing the wildlings south of the wall, is one of the rare moments where the initiative really is his. He makes the call himself, reasoning that the Night's Watch needs every able body it can get before the real war arrives. And it costs him everything. It's this exact decision, the one time he acts boldly on his own judgment, that gets him stabbed to death by his own brothers. The show almost seems to punish him for the one moment he actually steps outside the reactive role, which, if anything, tells you something about how rarely he's allowed to. Compare this to what's happening at the same time everywhere else in the story. While Jon is reacting to a mutiny he didn't see coming, Tyrion is on trial fighting for his life with words as his only weapon. While Jon is being resurrected by someone else's decision, Cersei is blowing up the Sept of Baelor and seizing the Iron Throne through her own ruthless planning. Jon's story, for most of its runtime, is something that is done to him. Here's where people push back on me the hardest, and I get it. because the Battle of the Bastards is genuinely one of the best episodes of television ever made. Jon looks incredible in it. He's getting trampled by his own men. He's fighting off an entire army, almost single-handedly for a few minutes. It's visceral and desperate, and it looks like the defining moment of his arc. But watch the actual battle again with a colder eye. Jon's plan is bad. He gets baited by Ramsay into a headlong cavalry charge that nearly gets his entire army slaughtered. It's specifically Sansa's foresight in secretly securing the Knights of the Vale that saves the battle, and by extension, saves Jon's life and his campaign. He walks directly into an obvious trap that Sansa warned him about beforehand, almost gets everyone killed because of his own impulsiveness, and is rescued by a political maneuver he wasn't even told about. The person who wins the Battle of the Bastards, strategically speaking, isn't Jon. It's Sansa. He's the sword. She's the hand holding it. That's the pattern with Jon almost everywhere in the show. He's extremely good at the physical, visible, dramatic parts of being a hero. The fighting, the enduring, the looking anguished on a battlement somewhere. He is consistently less central to the actual mechanics of power, strategy, and consequence that the show cares about underneath all that. There's a concept in storytelling worth borrowing here, because I think it explains Jon better than almost anything else. The idea of a character functioning less like a protagonist and more like a narrative catalyst. A catalyst doesn't need to act with intention to matter. It just needs to exist in the right place for other people's ambitions, loyalties, and decisions to collide around it. That's Jon. His identity as a secret Targaryen doesn't matter because of anything he does with it. It matters because of what it makes everyone else do. Sansa's trust starts to slip toward her siblings and away from Daenerys the moment she learns it. Varys, believing Jon would make a better and safer ruler than an increasingly unstable Daenerys, tries to spread word of his claim and is executed for the betrayal. Daenerys herself spirals into paranoia watching the people she trusts quietly recalculate their loyalties around this secret she can't control. None of that is Jon choosing anything. It's Jon existing as a fact that other, more decisive characters have to respond to right up to the point where the collapse he triggered forces someone else's hand entirely. And that's the part that really seals it for me. After Daenerys burns King's Landing and its people to the ground, it's Tyrion, not Jon, who makes the actual decision that ends her reign. Tyrion is the one who concludes she can't be allowed to keep ruling. And he's the one who goes to Jon and asks him to be the one to do it, because Jon is the only person left she still trusts enough to get close to. Jon doesn't choose that moment either. He's handed the hardest decision in the entire show by someone else. And even then, he only acts because Tyrion talked him into believing it was necessary. Immediately afterward, the show doesn't put him on a throne, doesn't make him a king, doesn't even really let him rule anything. It sends him back to the wall and then out beyond it, essentially erasing him from the political map entirely. But who actually wins the Game of Thrones? Looking at where the final season leaves everyone, Tyrion becomes Hand of the King. Sansa becomes Queen in the North, ruling her own kingdom outright. Bran, a character many people also underrated for years, ends up on the Iron Throne itself. Arya sails off to chart entirely new territory in the world, her own choice, made entirely on her own terms. And Jon? Jon gets sent back to the Night's Watch, the exact same institution he started the show, trying to escape the shadow of, and then walks north of the Wall with the Free Folk, outside the political structure of Westeros altogether. The title of the show is Game of Thrones. At the end of it, Jon Snow isn't playing the game. He's not even in the building where the game is played. He's outside it, in the snow. Literally and symbolically removed from the entire system the show spent 8 seasons building. That's not what happens to a protagonist. That's what happens to a character whose presence mattered enormously to everyone else's story, but whose own agency barely mattered to the plot at all. Now, I don't want to pretend Jon Snow is a badly written character, because he isn't. There's a version of this argument that makes it sound like he's just a passive prop. And that's not quite right either. Jon's defining trait, his stubborn, sometimes self-destructive commitment to doing what he thinks is right even when it costs him everything, is consistent and genuinely compelling. When Daenerys learns the truth about his parentage, She doesn't offer to share the throne with him. She asks him to keep it secret and frames their marriage as the thing that will keep the throne hers and hers alone. Jon refuses the secrecy. He insists he has to tell his sisters. It's not a rejection of power so much as a refusal to lie to the people he trusts, even when the woman he loves is asking him to. That's arguably the most morally coherent decision anyone makes in the entire final season, and it's one of the only times his own values, rather than someone else's plan, actually drive the outcome, even though, true to form, it's a decision that mostly just sets off a chain reaction of everyone else's choices, rather than one that gets him anything for himself. And there's a reading where his lack of ambition is the entire point, where Jon is deliberately written as the one character in a story about wanting power who never actually wants it, and that refusal is what makes him trustworthy enough for people like Sam and Sansa to keep believing in him. Under that reading, his unimportance to the mechanics of the plot is thematically deliberate. He's the still point the more ambitious characters orbit and eventually destroy themselves around, not unlike how a quiet, static character can end up revealing everyone else's flaws simply by not sharing them. Both readings can be true at once. Jon Snow can be thematically central to what the show is about, the cost of ambition, the burden of duty, while still being one of the least causally important characters in what actually happens. He's the eye of the storm. Everyone else is the storm. So when the credits roll and Jon is walking north with Tormund and Ghost, out past the wall, out of the game entirely, it isn't really a tragic ending. It's just the story finally putting him where he belonged the whole time. On the outside, watching everyone else play the game he was never really part of. What do you think? Was Jon Snow always more of a symbol than a player? Or am I underselling what he actually did? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.